first of all, a bit of a recap of the curriculum we've done so far, those first 10 modules. And then we're going to get stuck into the second 2 modules, 11 and 12. And then finally, we're going to start to use some of the tools we've got to put decisionship into practice. Because once we've covered all 12 modules, we should have a pretty fair understanding of how to do both the define, assess, and finally decide stage. So I'll run through a few case studies, so how you might put that into practice. And then, of course, we've got some Q&A time at the back end of that. There's not a huge number of people on the program today, so I would appreciate some questions if you've got them along the way or at the end. So with no further ado, let's just do a very, very quick recap. First of all, there's the entrepreneurial line model, which is what we've been covering on all of the 12 modules to date, which is a process of define, assess, decide. We then looked at the 6 lenses of foresight around the circle there, and today we're going to be looking at the perpetual growth principles of insight and then the decision bank of building hindsight. That's really what we're going to be focusing on today. So just as for you to remember that when you're assessing, you need to look at the future, which is called foresight. You need to look at the present, which is called insight. You need to look at the past, which is called hindsight. So as I mentioned, it'll be insight and hindsight that we'll be looking at today. Just as a recap on the foresight side, what we covered over the last modules was that there's 6 lenses of foresight. 3 of those concern the entrepreneur, the passion lens, the proficiency lens, and the philosophy lens. And then 3 of them concern the business, prototype, progress, and the plan lenses. Okay, so hopefully you've done a little bit of pre-work on each of those and now understand if you've done that pre-work how quick it can make decision making, which we'll get to at the tail end of this webinar. We developed the 6 mindsets to hopefully get you to remember quite easily what each of these lenses was all about. So the passion lens is a sailor mindset to try and get you to remember that you need a destination, essentially an end game. The philosophy lens has the gardener mindset, which is all about creating your real clarity around your values, because like a plant, there's roots. You know, if you get those really right, the rest of the things in your business are going to grow from there. And then the other one about you as an individual was the proficiency lens, and that's where we use the producer mindset, because producers are great at harnessing all the talent, which is really what your job is in your business, but to get really clear on your role and harnessing the talent around you. On the business side, we talked about the progress lens. You might remember the mountain model, the 8 steps. The mountaineer mindset reminds us that we need to be really clear on our vision and what stage we're in and how to get to the next stage. The prototype lens was all about the master chef mindset, paralleling the fact that creating a business model is just like creating your own recipe. And then finally, we looked at the plan lens, which was all about how do you be the architect for your business. And as you know, good architects focus on not only coming in on budget, but also they're looking for a quality outcome as well, which is really what we're all about in the planning stage. Not just about the numbers, not just about the quality, but the happy medium between the two. So if we move on to the new stuff, the first one I want to cover off is insight. Well, traditionally in business, and for those of us who have come out of the corporate world, you'd be familiar with using a business case. Okay, so companies, you know, in order to be able to justify whether they're going to spend some money or make a decision, oftentimes I'll say to the employee, well, prepare a business case and we'll think about it. Unfortunately, in small business, this doesn't work great, because if the business case preparer is the same person as the business case decider, you're really justifying, self-justifying, if you like, what you're trying to do. So, because as you know, for me, most business cases can be pretty self-justifying. So there had to be a new way of creating insight into your decision making, and this is probably some of the first IP that I actually developed in Blueprint, and really why we achieved from that point onwards quite a considerable amount of success. We cottoned on that there's actually some principles around creating some insight, and I love that quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson around principles. I won't read it, it's on the screen, you can read it yourselves, but essentially saying that if you really want to learn something, you should focus on principles first and methods second. Whereas so much in business, I think we think about, oh, you know, it's all about methods. How do we create a business case, or how do we launch this marketing campaign, or how do we be a better leader or a manager or whatever it might be. Whereas principles, once you get a grip of them and the rest of your team get a grip of them, you can really start to make some decisions in a much quicker and more methodical way. So I developed what I called the perpetual growth principles, 4 principles that if you understand that they harness the growth of a business, you can really start to make better and more informed decisions. So what are they? I'm not going to go into detail about how I derived them, other than to say that it was through reading some stuff about Newton's laws of motion. Because one of the things early on in Blueprint that we recognized why we were successful was that we started to reduce frictions. And then I remembered in Year 9 science being taught about Newton's laws of motion, and I did a bit more research about that and realized that really all 3 of his laws of motion are massively applicable to business. So how I made them applicable was that the first law of motion essentially means that we need to maximize the force, or reducing the frictions and fostering the actuators. Actuators are things that the frictions hold things back, the negative forces. Actuators push them forward, they're the positive forces. So I'll go through a little bit about what these negative and positive forces are in business and how you can harness them for good in your business. The second law of motion was all about that age-old equation you may remember from Year 9 science as well, force equals mass times acceleration. Well, I took that to mean that if you minimize the mass at a constant force, well, you're going to actually create a lot more forward motion. Okay, and then lastly, the last law of motion was principle 4, which is all about balance. That if you can create win-win sustainable outcomes or decisions, you will also create acceleration and growth. So it's definitely not required for you to understand the derivation of the perpetual laws of the perpetual growth principles, but for some people they're right into the details. That's why I include that for them. So what are they? So in the grey there, you'll see the 4 principles. Right in the middle is reducing frictions. I think out of all of the principles, this really is probably the most important one, and it stems from the fact that you really, if you can understand the frictions that are facing you and make decisions to overcome those decisions, you're going to go a lot further and faster. And then the other 3 principles, also important, are fostering actuators, maximising balance, and minimising mass, as we discussed before. So I'll go through a little bit more detail of each of these as we go forward. So where the frictions come into play is, in order to be successful at business, you really need a certain amount of knowledge, a certain amount of money, a certain amount of momentum, and a certain amount of time. If you've got all of those things, you're going to go pretty far and fast. Unfortunately, these things are pretty much in short supply. A shortage of money, for instance, gives you a lack of funding. A shortage of knowledge is like a lack of guidance, or a shortage of time and knowledge is a lack of focus, or spending too much time on things you have the least amount of knowledge about is a lack of focus. So every one of these 8 frictions affects us at one time or other throughout our business journey. And there's really not a friction that I can think of that won't fit into one of those 8. So they really cover nearly every pain point that you can experience in business, from not having enough support to not having enough sales or growth, or not having enough scale or reputation to get to the next stage. Okay, so if we look at the frictions that on the Training Entrepreneur Live program, there's a little diagnostic there called the frictions diagnostic. 40 questions. If you fill them in, you can really understand which of the frictions you experience in business the most. And why that's important is when you're making decisions, if, for instance, your biggest friction is that you don't have enough support and you're about to take on a new client, well, you know that friction is only going to get worse unless you do something about it. So a decision to bring on a new staff member is a good decision, because you're already in a situation where you're experiencing that friction in a pretty bad way. Or, for instance, if you've got a lack of focus, well, coming up with a brand new business idea is not a good time to be launching that right now. So a decision to say, no, I'm not going to proceed with that, if you're experiencing a lack of focus, is obviously going to be quite an easy decision to make. On the actuator side, there's 8 actuators that I've identified over the years I've had in business. It's pretty impossible to harness all of these all of the time, but again, from a decision-making point of view, deciding on the option that is more empowering or more innovative, inspiring, flexible, replicable, leverage, simple, or harnesses your reputation will help put you in a good position. Okay, so it's about saying, okay, out of these two options, which one will harness more actuators than the other? And then on the mass side of things, there's really four things that create mass in an organisation. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, isn't mass a good thing? The more people we've got, or the more products, or the more locations, or the more systems. Well, probably not. If you think about it, business moves at such a fast pace these days. You don't want to be a massive oil tanker out to sea that takes, I think they take like 10 kilometres to turn around. You want to be a little speedboat to compete with the big oil tankers, so you can pivot on a very easy way. So in order to do that, you need to reduce the mass that you have in business. People mass, I think, is something that starts to creep in. I think I might have shared it with you on one of my other webinars, but I remember that you might recall the story I mentioned about my friend in Pakistan, where there was, I think it was 5 of them did this 27-day trek in Pakistan, and they needed to take 85 porters. Well, that's because if you need 10 porters, you need porters to carry the porter's gear, and all of a sudden you've got porters. And in business, it's exactly the same. You can inadvertently, if you bring on 5 new people, you probably need 1 more manager and then another person in HR and someone in accounts to cover that extra workload as well. Likewise, if you have too many products, it can be confusing for your customers, and it also can be a lot more to actually update and fulfill on. Purchases are those things that you go into a shop and you go, okay, well, if I get that new computer, it's only going to be $2,000, but you don't realise that there's other costs that go ahead with. Maybe it's retraining on the new version of your computer, or it's getting the accessories, or the cover, or any other thing that goes with a purchase. For instance, in our business, we used to have a lot of software licenses. And you think, okay, well, software license is only $150 a month. That should be pretty okay. And then you realise that there's maintenance on top of that, and then you're in a contract. So if you want to stop using it, it's going to be a minimum of $1,800, etc. And then lastly, processes. A certain amount of process in a business is fine, but you just don't want to do it to a stage that you become like a corporate and you're that oil tanker out to sea that can't turn around quickly. You need processes that are quite nimble, easy to communicate, and focus on what's important. I know a lot of what we did in our business. In fact, we created a stationery process, which was quite laborious. Every time you wanted to get some paper out of the stationery cupboard, you had to fill in forms and that sort of stuff. And we realised that it was costing us more in time for people to actually fill out the form than it was saving us in stationery costs. So you don't want to overdo the processes either. So by minimising the mass in these 4 areas, you will certainly improve the speed of your business. And then lastly is this concept of how do we maximise balance between our stakeholders. There's two types of stakeholders. There's direct stakeholders, your clients, your investors, and your employees. You need to make sure when you're making a decision, it's a win-win decision for at least those 3 stakeholder groups. And then a lot of people, they forget to think about what's the impact on my stakeholders. One of the stakeholders, an indirect stakeholder, is a competitor. Well, if you put your prices down because you've got a lull at the moment, that could have a massive impact on your industry and your other competitors. And then in the future, when you are busy and you want to put your price up, all of a sudden the customers now expect a really low price, and it's been bad for everyone. And we've seen lots of examples of corporations doing bad things with things in community, oil spills or whatever it might be, greenhouse gases. That's not a win-win decision. So when we're making decisions, we need to make sure, is this a win-win decision for the business and for my direct and indirect stakeholders? So an example there might be, if you're thinking about expanding overseas, as a decision making, we need to go, okay, is that going to create balance for my family and friends? Well, probably not, because I'm going to have to spend more time overseas. My family, I'm not going to get to see them as much. So you really need to keep that into consideration when making these decisions. It's not just about the business, it's also about your stakeholders. Okay, well that's really the 4 perpetual growth principles in a nutshell. We'll have an opportunity to do a little bit of work around the principles when we get to use the app a little bit later. But let's move now to the other sight. So we've covered now foresight, we've covered insight, and the other sight is hindsight. Okay, so hindsight is all about looking at the past and making sure that we're becoming a better decision maker based on the past decisions we made, which seems pretty obvious. However, in my experience with entrepreneurs, they tend to make the same decisions or bad decisions over and over and over again. They seem just not to learn for some reason. As an example, one of those things that I often see is people try and do business with the first person in front of them. They go, oh, I've got this position. Oh, I know John Jones. He's available. Let's get him on board. Well, that can be quite a quick decision, but unfortunately, what happens with hindsight is 3 months into that employing that person, they realise they're not a cultural fit, or it's their friendship is a little bit in jeopardy now. It's not easy to work with friends or keep them accountable. So really, that person, the first time they made a bad decision like that, they should say, okay, well, next time, I'm not going to just hire the first person I see. I'm actually going to do a rigorous recruitment process to make sure I have a job description and get the right person for that job description. Okay, so that's an example of hindsight. And a decision bank is purely the place where we put our hindsight, that we can actually develop it. So there's 3 ways that we do that. We first have to anticipate what success will look like. Then we need to evaluate what happened. And then lastly, we need to create learnings from that evaluation, which is relating it back to future decision making. And by doing this, we're going to be better. We're going to learn a lot about ourselves from a decision speed point of view, decision information point of view, and a decision angst point of view. So it's easy to talk about this. I think it's probably best if I do a bit of an example. But before we do that, let me just talk to you about some of the things you need to ask in each of these areas. So if you're anticipating, so let's say we've just made a decision to employ a general manager. Okay, so I have decided to employ a general manager for $150,000 by the 1st of January. Okay, you then need to document the size of the decision. Okay, it's a pretty major decision, and the type. That's an employee-related decision. You'll remember from the define module that the reason why type's quite important is when you're coming up with similar types in the future, you need to say, oh, all right, whenever I'm employing someone, I always need to ask these questions or make sure that I don't employ people in front of me or whatever it might be. The next thing we need to do to anticipate, we'll say, well, how will we know if success has happened? How will you know if this has been the right decision? And then we'll simply ask, when will you know if it's been the right decision? And you really should be diarising that, although we've got a tool that should help you with that. Next, we'll evaluate the outcome. So, for instance, if we hired a general manager on the 1st of January for $150,000, and we say that success would be if the turnover of our business is say $100,000, maybe $1 million by the end of the calendar year. We'll know that by Christmas is really what we put into either our diary or into the app that I'll share with you in a minute. Well, when we get to evaluate it, Christmas comes around, it'll come up in our diary saying, okay, you made a decision back in January to hire a general manager for $150,000. You said success would be if your business turned over $1 million more than it did. What happened? Well, we only got 800,000, okay? And then we need to ask, well, to what degree would you change your decision-making style? Do we make it too hasty? Should have we made it before? Did we get too much information? Did I have too much angst around it? Maybe I should have done it before. That's the sort of data we're looking for. And then finally, with what you know now, would you have made the same decision? Because one of the things you need to remember is just because it was a bad decision doesn't mean that your decision-making system was flawed. So with the information you had at the time, it might have been the only decision you could have made, even though it turned out as a bad outcome. Okay, that can be slightly confusing. So apologies in advance if that's not immediately obvious. And then lastly, the relate stages. You need to start to think about how do we convert those learnings that we've got through the anticipate and then the evaluate stage, so it's going to be easy for you to learn from next time. So I always like to think about what are the 3 things I've learned from this decision. So this hiring decision, it might be that someone takes a lot longer to get up to speed than I ever thought. The second thing might be don't change business models halfway through the year because it stuffs everything up. And the third thing might be that it's better to employ someone with greater experience rather than have a good personality that have never done that position before, right? So they're the 3 things that I might have learned from that particular decision. So the decision bank, well, as a bit of a recap, we'll go through the app in a minute, but as a bit of a recap, we've said that there's a three-step process: define, assess, and decide. The hindsight process is then all about making sure that we follow the foresight, insight, and hindsight, and then lastly, the decision bank is right at the middle of that model. That's which is going to everything that we do in the decisionship model should be logged in the decision bank. You know, I'm not talking about lots and lots of paper or lots and lots of admin. It's pretty simple. You know, we define the issue that I need some support. We assess the options, getting a general manager or maybe getting a sales manager. We made a decision to hire a general manager, and then we do that feedback loop that we just talked about in the hindsight section. That can be as simple as it is. So now we've pretty much covered the three modules. The first level of understanding was just realizing that, you know, your job as an entrepreneur is as easy as making decisions. That's as simple as it is start to make them faster, better informed decisions without the angst. And if you get nothing else out of the program, hopefully that gives you a new confidence or understanding of what business is about. The next level of understanding was realizing there's a process to follow, that you need to define the issue or opportunity really well, because if you get that right, the rest of the decisionship process flows pretty easily. Then we need to assess the options based on that defined issue or opportunity, and then finally we need to make a decision. And one thing I've learned with Decide, which we covered off in the first webinar, is you really need to actually write it down. People make lots of decisions and then they change their mind the next day. Well, that's not effective decision making. You really need to make sure you have a process to log your decisions or share it with someone as a very minimum. Okay, so that was the second level of understanding. And then finally, the third level of understanding was where we actually got really effective at foresight, insight, and hindsight. Right? It's a very base level. We're just looking in the future, looking in the present, and then looking in the past. Well, there's a science around how I do it, and I've shared this with thousands of entrepreneurs around the world. And the foresight is learnt through using those 6 lenses of foresight. The insight is using these perpetual growth principles we just talked about, and the hindsight is developing your own decision bank. Okay, so if you do those things there at the bottom, you're going to become a master of decisionship before you know it. And I'm not saying that you need to do this for the next 20 years of your business career. It's about a habit. How do we do this 20 times, and then all of a sudden it becomes quite instinctive? Okay, but simply to do it 20 times is no easy task as well. But hopefully we've got a few tools that we can help you with that. Okay, so that's decisionship in a nutshell. Now let's get some practical applications of how we might be able to do that. And I want to use the decisionship app on the website. Let's go to the decisionship website. We go to our dashboard, and we go back to the Train Your Entrepreneurial Live program. Okay, so what we've just covered there are those levels. So you can click on any of those levels and go to those particular units. But what we want to go to is the decision bank. Okay, this is where you can start to log your decisions and actually learn from it. So you can log decisions, and you can actually start to use that methodology around hindsight, insight, and foresight to make better decisions. But let's first look at the fundamental thing of just logging information in the decision bank. So let's assume we've already made a decision to what have we decided? We've decided to take to launch a new product by 1st of January to attract accountants. Okay, that might be what we've decided. So we'll hit proceed here. Is that a mega decision, a major decision, or a minor decision? Well, it's probably only a minor decision, really. It's probably something around strategy. Yeah, it's probably a market expansion opportunity, probably. We'll proceed there. I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see the whole app. How will I know if it's the right decision or not? If we generate $100,000 in sales for that product by July 2014. Okay, that might be what we've decided. When are we going to know? Well, we'll obviously know by July how much we've got in, so we'll put it in our calendar in July, or 1st of July maybe, and we'll proceed on that basis. I'm not sure if any of you guys have done this already, put some stuff in the calendar, but it's pretty freaky 3 months down the track and you get an email from the decision team saying you made that decision, and it really hammers home how important decision making is, often when you get it wrong as well. What are the actions you need to take to implement this decision? Well, the first thing we'll do is develop a logo with my agency. Second thing, we'll communicate it to clients. And maybe the third thing we'll do will be put a sales wallboard up in the office so we can track how many sales we're actually making. Okay, so we've logged that in. Your decision now has been logged. Well, down the track, when July the 1st comes around, you're going to get that email. Okay, so we can click in here. When that email comes up, it'll say you made the following decision. You decided to launch a new product by 1st of January to attract accountants. Your criteria for a successful outcome was if it generated 100 grand. What degree did it achieve? Well, we go, oh, we got 80 grand, so not quite there, but let's put our bar across there. To what degree should you change your style for these decisions? Well, really, I should have launched that product 12 months before, so I should have been faster rather than sitting on my hands. I did a lot of research. Really, I needed less info than what I was really seeking, and definitely I needed to have less angst. I was really worried about the success of this, but it was fairly successful. So I think in the future, I need to learn to be faster with less information and more angst. Maybe I'm one of those data junkie types that if you've done the profile, really this happens often. With what you know now, would have you made the same decision? Yes, I would. And then what are 3 things that I've learnt about doing that is clients are initially resistant. Keep the product low tech. I think that's what we're learning in decisionship with people's various skill set in that. And maybe the other thing we've learned is our branding, our new branding for our product really worked is separate product branding is great, right? So they're the 3 things I've learned. And your learnings are now being included in the decision bank. So next time I then go to search for some decisions, I can type it in there, and that type of decision will come up for product-related decisions, or even if it was just expansion decisions might come up. So that's, if all you do is just log your decisions in the decision bank and then review them whenever that time comes up, I think that's going to be a good thing. Okay, but what I wanted to talk to you about today is something a little bit more complicated. How could we actually use the decisionship app to actually help us make decisions? Okay, so let's go through and do that. Let's think about a decision we're going to make. We're going to go to the define. What is the issue or opportunity you're trying to overcome or capitalize on? Okay, so for instance, there's not enough sales in my business, might be the issue. What are the facts? Sales are 500,000, 90% come from referrals. The feelings are, I want to be bigger, I would like to get a higher salary. Any time I launch a marketing initiative, it fails, and I go back to referrals. Okay, so that's what's going on there. In our definition, how important is this? It's pretty major. It's a sales decision. It's really around marketing. When making this decision, I'll need to decide between the following 2 alternatives. Okay, to bring in sales, I might say, okay, should I spend 10,000 at a trade expo? Or the alternative might be spend 10,000 on Google AdWords, right? So they're the things that we're deciding too. You remember from the first module, or the second module rather, that the clearer you can do around the definition, your brain thinks in binary. So between those two options, it's, you really bring your gut feeling to play a lot more. Okay, so we'll proceed on that basis. Next up, we need to then start to do some pre-work. Okay, we need to set what our end game is. So my end game is to realise the entrepreneur essence. This particular business end game might be to generate 5 million value on exit, might be my end game by 2017. Okay, we enter our end game. We'll then enter other things, the values. There's some example values in there, so they're probably fine. We'll put in our role to be free to develop IP and share with entrepreneurs. Your job role might be focus more time on customers, less on operations, maybe. Enter our role. And then we've got to do our vision. And then you should actually set the stage you're in your business. If you're still in the startup stage, what's going to get you to the next stage? We enter our vision and our stage that we're in. Put our magic metric in, which is pretty important. So this business might be number of customers on the base product. Maybe their magic metric. The priorities for the quarter might be 1, spend less time at work. 2, get 100 new customers. 3, maybe sort out my accounting, right, my priorities. And then finally, the frictions should come out of the frictions diagnostic that you could complete and saying, okay, my biggest friction is I don't have enough growth. Okay. Okay, well, that was already so. So my biggest friction is I don't have enough growth. My second biggest friction might be I need a lack of, I feel a lack of support right now. Okay. So now we can return to the assess side of things and start to assess things. So we'll first of all assess it on our frictions. Which option will help me reduce my 2 biggest frictions? Okay. Well, actually that should have come up there. I don't know why that hasn't. Let me just always the case whenever you try and demonstrate something, it doesn't always work. We're going to lose a little bit of our work there, but let's go back to the dashboard. But you see how just that little bit of pre-work took me 5 minutes then, but it might take you half an hour to do the pre-work. You'll find that by doing the pre-work, it'll make decision making, whether you use this app or you use the physical form that we've given you in the program, really quick. You can actually make a decision once you've got that pre-work done in a matter of minutes. Okay, so let me just issue opportunity was sales. We should be able to skip these ones. Decision. And then the 2 options, which is the main thing I want to give here, was a Trade Expo, and then the other one was the Google AdWords. Right. So now when we assess, to help get more sales, I need to decide between a Trade Expo and Google AdWords. That looks fine, so I've edited that. Now we're assessing which option will help me achieve my end game of generating 5 million value on exit by 2017. Okay. Well, I think this Trade Expo comes around once every year, whereas Google AdWords I could really ramp it up. So probably this one would be the one that would give me the best bang for my buck. Which option will adhere to my values of be awesome, go fast, help others? Probably the really both about the same there, I think. Next thing we'll think about which option will help me achieve my role of focus, more time on customers and less on operations. Well, I think the Trade Expo would be probably this one there. And then the next, on the progress side of things, which option will help me complete to be the Google for entrepreneurs? Maybe the obviously the Google one in that instance. On the prototype side, which one will help my magic metric of number of customers on the base product? Well, definitely Google AdWords is more scalable there. And lastly, on the lenses, which option will achieve my priorities of spending less time at work, get 100 new customers, and sort out my accounting? Again, think they're probably not, there's neither really having an impact on either of those. And then on the friction side, which option will help me reduce my two biggest frictions of lack of growth and lack of support? I think Google AdWords is going to be the best one in that instance. Okay, now we're going to look at the actuators, which are going to help empowerment and replication, innovation and inspiration, flexibility and simplicity. What about on the math side of things? Obviously, this option 2 is coming up here for some reason. It gives you the idea of going through the process. And then finally, the last of the perpetual growth principles is balance. We can go through and do that. And then you need to ask which of these potential decisions is going to help me learn from my hindsight. My hindsight in previous similar decisions was you need scalable marketing, maybe. Well, which one of these would help with scalable marketing? Well, I think the Google AdWords would be the one in that instance. Okay. And then what about my peers? What would they say? They'd say trade, maybe their hindsight is trade expos take a lot of energy with tire kickers, for instance. Well, in that case, Google AdWords would adhere to their hindsight in that area. It then scores it up, and then we can make a decision, which is what we did from the other one. So you can see by just following this simple process, and unfortunately didn't work on this instance as well, you can really do it in 10 minutes, but capture each of those 3 steps of the process: define, decide, and assess. And in the assess side, you can actually capture that pre-work you've done around the 6 lenses of foresight, the hindsight, and the insight. Okay, so if we now go back to the Q&A, we've just got a small amount of time now. If you've got some questions or some comments. Carl, you mentioned you've been using a Google Excel doc. Yeah, and you also mentioned in the online app, are decisions public? No, decisions are not public. You're the only one that can actually access your own decisions. Down the track, we're going to have an option at the very end of the app. When you share the 3 learnings, it'll say, do you want to keep them private, or are you happy to share them with our community? And then that will be the only thing that gets shared, not all of the information in your decision bank at all. So what Carl, were you asking about Google Excel? Oh, you've been relating the decision ship app. So you've developed your own version of the decision app in Google Excel. Is that correct? Yeah, well, it's probably sometimes it can be more easily accessible, but hopefully as our technology improves, it's going to be a lot easier, because this was really a prototype that we developed for the PC. We know that once it's a mobile app, people are more likely to use it. So that's where it is at the moment, is in the build phase for the mobile app. But I know one of my colleagues, Stuart, what was about 4 years ago, when he went through the decisionship program, he got so excited about it, he built an Excel spreadsheet to roughly do it, and that's why we came up with the idea, well, why don't we create some kind of system that might do that more automatically. Robin, you've asked how many are in the community at present. Is there a group anywhere on social media sites, etc., LinkedIn? Yes and no. We've got a group of coaches that do have their own communities, so we can put you in touch with one of our coaches. But we're really in the rebuild phase at the moment with the software. It's sort of the Training Entrepreneurial AI program. All of the IP is very well tested. Most of the the videos I think are solid, but the actual software to be able to use the IP, I think we're still in beta, and that's where we're looking for feedback from people to say, okay, how can we really make this usable? And that's where the community will stem from there. So let me know if there's any questions, or if you want to put your hand up, I'm happy to take you off mute. Yeah, so Carl, you mentioned about your Philippines side of things. Yeah, it does. On one side, it keeps your purchase mass low, isn't it? Because it's obviously cheaper. But on the upside, it means you've got to deal in different time zones. You've probably got to go over there and set them up. There's a whole lot of cultural issues that you might have not have banked on. So yeah, maths is a really interesting concept. And I think once you get your head around that more is not better, it changes everything. I remember 6 months into business, we were located in Sydney when we first started. And then pretty quickly we thought, we really need to demonstrate that we're a national company. So I started an office in Brisbane and one in Melbourne. And so before I know it, within 6 months, we had 3 state offices. And then 6 months down the track, I had to close the Brisbane one, close the Melbourne one. And then for the next 10 years, we only had the Sydney office. And we realized that, you know what, you can do a lot centrally rather than having lots and lots of offices. So I think maths is definitely something that, as a good takeout, you should try and share with your people. One of the most highly regarded awards in our business was called the Turkish Haggling Award, to try and generate a culture where people bargain for everything, hence reducing the mass of the purchase price. And that was really effective in building a culture of people that were a bit stingy on the purchase side, rather than just buying at the first price that comes up. So let me know if there's any more questions. I know it could take you a few minutes to type, so maybe I'll just have a period of silence waiting for your questions. But Carl's got no simple ones. Maybe you should throw me a complex one. Robin said, "Have you got any other tips and learnings like that you can pass on, please?" Well, it's putting me on the spot, Robin, hasn't it? Well, it's good to have context when giving advice, because business advice is one of those things that has to be a little bit contextual sometimes. One of the tips I have, we probably covered that in the first module, but around the size of decisions is, if it's a really minor decision, don't spend too much time in it. Decisionship is all about spending the time where it counts. And absolutely, the slight change in colour of your brochure isn't going to make a difference of achieving your end game or not. So my thing would be, spend more time on the decisions that are really important and less on the easy decisions. The other thing I should do around that, where I would say, if one of my staff asked to purchase something, I would say no. And then the second time they asked, I'd say no. And then the third time they'd ask, I'd say yes. It just meant that I knew that if they went to the effort of asking me 3 times, it was probably pretty important. So if you say no the first time someone wants it, I think people can get by with a lot more than they think they need. So, Kim, you've asked, would I recommend Google AdWords? You're trying to decide actually this. I'm probably not the right person to ask. What I love about Google AdWords is the niche nature of it. You can really, once you get good at it, you can really decide on a niche and target those people, rather than spending, say, a radio ad which is going to hit everyone. Your business is very niche, so therefore your potential prospects should be very niche as well. So I think from that point of view, Google AdWords is great. I love the reporting aspect, so you can see even if a campaign fails, you can start to learn why it failed. But also what I love is the scalability of it. You can spend a small amount of money, get the right formula, and then you can start to have confidence to spend a lot more. So I like any marketing campaign which allows you to fail first and then improve, fail a bit more, and then improve, and then finally get a success. Whereas if you put a lot of your budget into just one thing, banking on that being successful, oftentimes it doesn't happen. Robin, you've said you spend a lot of time comparing apples and oranges. Um, yeah, in that binary decision making. Yeah, I think it is important that you probably get things that are a little bit similar. You can always compare the yes decision versus a no decision, but I find it just not as powerful. So back to that example we used before about the Trade Expo. If someone comes up to you and say, will you spend 10,000 on Trade Expo, rather than thinking about it from a yes/no point of view and saying, okay, that same $10,000, where else could I spend it? And that's where maybe Google AdWords is the alternative, and then you start to compare the two based on all of the pre-work that you've done. No apologies needed around your typing. Okay, so guys, that's the time allocated up. If there's no more, I'm happy to answer any more questions if you've got them. But just to make sure that we finish fairly close on time. That's really all got for you today, but happy to answer any questions. Be keen to keep in contact with you. And also, I really recommend refreshing your memory. You might have been through the Train Your Entrepreneurial Life program, or you've listened to the webinars. The more that you can constantly, refresh around some of these lessons, the more you're going to put it into place, because it's so much information, it's just a little bit overwhelming to put all of it in place all at one time. So now that you've got a fairly good overview understanding of it, start to think about, okay, what's the first thing that I'm actually going to put into place in my business, rather than I'm going to put everything into place, okay? So for instance, Carl, when you mentioned before about the mass, go back to the office and say, okay, let's actually have a mass inventory. Let's look at all of the systems and processes, all of our products, all of our staff positions, all of our, what was the other one? Purchases, and think, where can we start to cull? And you'll be surprised how much more profit you make, how much more nimble you are, how much more budget that frees up, how much more people's time frees up, how much more your customers appreciate a very simple offering, all of those things. Robin, you've asked for an info grant. Haven't thought about that. It's a good tip. There you go. That's my takeout from this webinar. So thanks for that. All right, guys. Good luck with winning at the game of business, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future.